Our thanks to Adams Road Band for that musical introduction. Welcome to this edition of Viewpoint on Mormonism. I'm your host, Bill McKeever, founder and director of Mormonism Research Ministry. And today I have the pleasure of being with a good friend, Rob Bowman. Rob Bowman is the executive director of the Institute for Religious Research based in Michigan. And he has done years of study on Mormonism and adds a lot to this study. And today we're asking the question, what is Reformed Egyptian? Because Reformed Egyptian is mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And as we're going to read from the book Mormon, chapter 9, this is the language that was written on the gold plates that Joseph Smith allegedly found and eventually translated into what we have today, the Book of Mormon.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Give us a little bit of an explanation of what you want to talk about today, Rob.
Well, I want to look at this subject of the languages of the Bible in contrast to the language of the Book of Mormon. And the basic issue here is this. In the case of the Book of Mormon, we don't have any original language text of it. Yeah, there is this thing called the Anthon transcript. It's not even supposedly copied from the same part of the plates, and nobody knows what it says.
And we should mention the Anthon transcript
is this piece of paper that Joseph wrote some characters on and gave to his friend Martin Harris to take to New York City to show to Charles Anthon and a couple of other scholars. Anthon told him it was a fraud and forget the whole thing, and they went ahead with the project anyway of producing this translation. So the paper showed up years later, or a copy of the paper maybe showed up, and it has some markings on it. Nobody can tell what language they might have been, if they were any language, much less what they said. Since Joseph would have been copying from the part of the plates, if they existed, that had the material that later on his translation of it got lost, this isn't even the Book of Mormon. So other than that piece of paper, which has a few lines of characters on it, we don't have any original language text of the Book of Mormon at all. We also don't have any text that has the language or the script of the Book of Mormon or of anything else in the same language. So this reference in the Book of Mormon to Reformed Egyptian is referring to an unknown language.
Well, should we read what it says in the Book of Mormon?
That would be great.
The Book Mormon precedes the Book of Ether in the Book of Mormon, so if you want to know where we're at here, but this is in chapter 9. Verse 32 begins with this, "And now, behold, we have written this record according to our knowledge in the characters which are called among us the Reformed Egyptian, being handed down and altered by us according to our manner of speech." Verse 33 begins with, "And if our plates had been sufficiently large, we should have written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew hath been altered by us also. And if we could have written in Hebrew, behold, you should have had no imperfection in our record. But the Lord knoweth the things which we have written, and also that none other people knoweth our language, and because that none other people knoweth our language, therefore he hath prepared means for the interpretation thereof." Now, it seems to me, Rob, if in fact you would have had no imperfection in our record if they had written in Hebrew, but they didn't write in Hebrew because they would have needed more plates, why couldn't they have just gotten more gold and made more plates and produce a perfect record for us to examine later on?
And we're talking about a period of 1,000 years during which these plates were supposedly inscribed by a line of prophets. So they had plenty of time to come up with the plate material if that was really an issue. The other point here is that they could have just left some stuff out, like all the geographical descriptions that don't mean anything to the modern reader. Those could have been omitted. And a lot of other things, a lot of repetitions could have been omitted. But nevertheless, this is what we have. So the question is this plausible, what the Book of Mormon says here about its own language? And the first point I'd make about it is the fact that the Book of Mormon is talking about its own language is itself not plausible. People don't do that. You don't read a book and have the author say, hi, I'm writing this in English. And my English was influenced a little bit by my French upbringing. So there's a little bit of French in there too. You don't see that kind of thing in any literature. You cannot find one reference anywhere in the Old or the New Testament to the author telling us anything about his own language or what language he's writing in. There isn't any such statement anywhere in the Bible, and that's typical for ancient literature, medieval literature, modern literature. People don't talk about what language they're writing in because they're writing for people that read the same language. So why is that happening in the Book of Mormon? The Book of Mormon gives us this explanation. It wasn't written for people that read the same language. It was written for modern readers. But here's the problem. No modern reader has the Reformed Egyptian text or can even look at it. In other words, it doesn't matter what was on the plates. It could have been chicken scratches. Literally. It could have just been chickens walking all over the metal, or somebody, a 2-year-old, banging on the plates with a chisel for all it's worth, because nobody ever read the plates. Joseph Smith didn't read the plates. He didn't look at the plates when he was translating them, supposedly. He supposedly looked at the interpreters, or more likely, apparently, a stone in a hat.
And we know now that the Mormon Church is publicly admitting this in
Right.
an official capacity, so
Yes.
there's no argument about that anymore. Whereas
That's right.
I remember years ago bringing up the idea of the seer stone, as it's called, to a Mormon, and of course he thought I was lying about this. That was just a horrible story to tell about.
Right, and all
his faith.
those pictures in Mormon literature and on Mormon websites about Joseph with his finger on the gold plates, reading them, studying them prayerfully, and coming up with the translation. That was all mythology, because Joseph didn't look at the plates when he was producing his dictation. In fact, they were probably covered up, whatever they were covered up with a blanket or something like that with linen, and nobody ever actually looked at them. So that's the first problem. That it isn't even plausible for the author to be talking about the language of the plates, because nobody needs to know anything about what the language was. Nobody's going to be ever looking at the language. No one has access to the text in which it was originally written. Now contrast that with the Bible. The Bible was written primarily in 2 languages, Hebrew and Greek. There are also parts that are in Aramaic, especially in Daniel and a few statements by Jesus quoted verbatim in the Gospels. The authors never make a big deal about this. When Jesus is quoted as speaking in Aramaic, of course, that we know that, we're told that, but the writers never tell us about their own language. But we actually have the texts. We actually have the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek texts of the Bible. They've been very well preserved. The text has been very well preserved. And modern scholars and even ordinary pastors can read the Bible in the original languages. That's a terrific contrast between the Bible and the Book of Mormon. It tells us that we can be confident that when we look at the Bible, we know we're reading what the Bible writers actually said. If you want to believe that about the Book of Mormon, you're basically taking one man's word for it, Joseph Smith.
And I don't know if a lot of Latter-day Saints realize why that bothers us so much. It really does all go back to Joseph Smith. Everything goes back to Joseph Smith. And when you talk to Latter-day Saints, the reason why they believe Joseph Smith for everything that he said and make excuses for some of the other things that he did was because of this presupposition. They already believe he's a prophet. And for some reason, they feel that prophets can do just about anything, even violate God's law, and be okay with that. It just amazes me.
Right. Well, it really is a religion based on faith in one man. The foundational event, according to Mormons, as to the foundation of their whole religion, is a vision that Joseph Smith alone had. The Book of Mormon is translated by one man who claims that he received the words in some mysterious fashion for what the Book of Mormon is supposed to say. Nobody else ever got to even look at the plates and read them, or if they could. And if we had them today, I guarantee you they would be decipherable. They would if it was anything related to Egyptian, Hebrew, or both, it would be decipherable. So the fact that we don't have these things shows that Mormonism is a religion that's based on simply trusting that Joseph Smith was telling the truth.
Let's go back to verse 33, though. And if our plates had been sufficiently large, we should have written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew hath been altered by us also. Now, let's go back to that first part. If our plates had been sufficiently large. Joseph Smith gives us the size of the plates, 6 by 8 by 6 inches deep.
Right.
He translates the top 2 inches, and the rest of the plates were sealed. But if our plates had been sufficiently large, why would they have to be sufficiently large? Why can't you just make another set of plates?
Right.
A volume 2, if you will.
Right. That's a very good question. I have no answer to that.
It's just that when I read this, I'm going, no, why would that be an excuse? I don't understand why that would be an excuse. And I think you make a good point. There is so much needless verbiage in the Book of Mormon narrative that if gold plates were scarce or hard to come by, and it's hard for me to believe that they would have been hard to come by, even if you put the Book of Mormon lands in Central America, abundance of gold. If you put them in North America, abundance of gold. Gold doesn't seem to be a big problem, I would think, for whatever area that you want to pick.
Right.
I just don't understand that excuse.
Especially if you're allowed to say that they weren't pure gold, as most Mormon scholars are now claiming, that they were a mix of gold and some more common metal. Well, then that really is no excuse for not having more of these
And what
plates.
you're talking about is the Tumbaga theory that
Right.
we hear a lot about in recent time. It just seems awfully odd to me.
I want people to understand here that the Book of Mormon draws attention to itself in these kinds of peculiar ways for a reason. And the reason why it does that is because it's a modern work, and the author, who I would maintain is Joseph Smith, is trying to give us reasons why you can't check out what he said. I'm sorry, even if you could see the plates, you wouldn't be able to read them because nobody knows our language. It's sort of Egyptian, but we changed it so you wouldn't be able to read it anyway. This is essentially a kind of a shell game manipulation to explain why we don't even bother worrying about not looking at the plates, because you couldn't read them anyway. And the only way we can know what's in the text is if Joseph is inspired to receive the translation by a revelation. So this is really aimed at modern readers to tell them why they should believe what Joseph Smith says the Book of Mormon says.
And I just think it's a dead giveaway when it talks about, but the Hebrew hath been altered by us also.
Right.
Of course, that makes you ask, why would you do that?
Languages and scripts do change over
Certainly.
centuries and millennia, so that part itself doesn't bother me, but the author there's no reason for the author to talk about the fact that languages and scripts change over periods of time. Why would he bring that up? He's bringing that up to make an excuse. This is why you can't read it.
But getting back to that, though, yes, language does change over time, but do you know of any place in history where a particular writer says, I'm doing the changing?
Yeah, that's right. They don't do that.
Yeah, and yet in this case, we seem to have the culprits that were involved. The people that are mentioned here are the ones that have been altering that as well.
And in fact, we have ancient Hebrew in various stages of development, and even though the language and the script changed, you can still read both versions. So the fact that the language changed, or the characters even might have been modified, would not prevent scholars from being able to decipher the text.
We've been talking with Rob Bowman. He's the executive director for the Institute for Religious Research. I encourage you to check out their website. It's irr.org.